Please be seated for tonight's talk. Sit comfortably so you can face the teacher. And in a moment, we will recite the Gata on the Buddha Sutra. Gata on opening the sutra. The Dharma incomparably profound and infinitely subtle is rarely encountered, even in millions of ages. Now we see it, hear it, receive and maintain it. May we completely realize the Tathagata's true meaning. So good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I know I always ask. So thank you all for being here. New faces, old faces. A lot of us really love Wednesday evenings because it's so quiet, and in contrast to Sundays, which can be a little bit crazy. I do love Wednesdays, but I also often feel fatigue on a Wednesday. You know, you get that slump in the middle of the week. So practicing with the mind of fatigue is interesting. Or as they say in Buddhism, sloth, mind of sloth, which sounds terrible, you know. Fatigue sounds much better. And we do talk a lot about, in Buddhism, about working with our minds, obviously. It's what we're all about. So working with our habitual patterns, with our strong emotions, and not getting hooked by them. Recognizing that they in themselves are not a problem. It's how you relate to them. And it's really the basis of practice, because we have to be able to see that in order to practice the precepts, the ethical teachings of Buddhism. We have to be able to see that in order to engage the paramitas, the virtues, generosity, moral discipline, patience, joyful effort, etc. So we work with taming the mind and actually being present to our lives rather than hanging out in the midst of delusion. And we learn to make friends with our minds. Because if we battle with our minds, it's an endless venture. We will always battle with our minds. There will always be clouds floating across the sky, no matter how hard you battle those clouds. Simply, you'll just be involved in an endless battle. So how do we learn to relate to our minds in a friendly way? And the especially good news from Buddhism, we often focus on the negative, on the traps in our mind, but there actually is good news in Buddhism. There actually are innate qualities of mind which are conducive to practice, which are conducive to the path of awakening. And I shouldn't say that we focus on the negative. It's probably me who focuses the Celtic bloodline. But tonight I'd really like to talk about the positive, I shouldn't say positive, those conducive qualities of mind. Having said that, we've talked about the kleshas in the past, the afflictions, those things that are obstructions. They fixate us. And in the center of the wheel of life, that picture of samsara as you come in the door by the shoe rack there, are the three poisons, the three root kleshas. Greed, represented by the rooster, ignorance, represented by the pig, and anger, represented by the snake. And from those three root kleshas, all of the other kleshas emanate. Pride, jealousy, whatever your particular deal with your particular karma inclines you to. They all have their root in greed, anger, ignorance. But as disruptive as those are, and sometimes they seem just immovable, they're transitory. They come, they go, clouds in the sky. There's nothing fixed or solid about them. Roshi always says, it's just the weather. It's just the weather. Sometimes the weather's pretty bad, but of course everything changes. But what the kleshas do, what the real danger of them is they give us a pre-packaged set of responses to the circumstances in our lives. And if we can't see that, we will never break free of those patterns. So what we work on in our practice is actually seeing what's happening. And to do that, you have to be present to what's happening. And the other thing we talk about, so the kleshas, the other thing we talk about are the hindrances, the negative mind states that we all know, at least I do, which is sensual desire, anger, sloth, experiencing it right now, restlessness, and doubt. And often they're talked about in terms of meditation practice, because during one period, 20-minute period of zazen, you can go through that whole spectrum, right? But they also arise out there in our everyday lives. I think we're all very familiar with them. So the good news is there are innate qualities of mind which actually help us. And these are called the 7 factors of awakening. Have you heard of? See, we do focus a little too much on the hindrances and the kleshas. There are the 7 factors of awakening. And they're qualities of mind that the Buddha said were conducive to good practice and a necessary part of the path to awakening. So these are really powerful. The factors are, and they'll sound really familiar. We talk about these in different contexts all the time, but the 7 factors of awakening actually brings them all together. So they're mindfulness, investigation, energy, joy, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. And why, the factors of awakening, it sounds like a really lofty ideal that might seem unattainable, but they're actually innate qualities of mind you have just by being virtue of being human. You don't have to do anything to actually attain these. You already have them. What we can do, of course, is practice with them, nurture those seeds. So in Buddhism, we talk about these factors as both the characteristics of awakening and part of the path of awakening. And that's typical Buddhist, right? We're always building the plane as we're flying it. Practice is realization. If you wait for everything to be perfect, your ducks to be in a row, well, you're going to die waiting, right? So you might as well fly that plane while you're building it. The Buddha uses the metaphor for the 7 factors of the waters gathering up in the Himalayas. Of course, he was from what is Nepal these days. The water gathering in pools and then flowing into streams, into tributaries, into rivers, out to the ocean. And in the same way, the 7 factors of awakening can erode the kleshas, erode the hindrances, and free our minds. They're also known as the anti-hindrances. So they're like antidotes specifically for the hindrances and the obscurations of mind. Roshi said, well, he said it a few times, that in every moment of our life, we're practicing something. You know, we're not necessarily practicing zazen on the cushion, but if we're not, we're practicing something else. It's never just nothing. There's always something going on. Sometimes we're practicing habits, and sometimes we're practicing in an intentional way to actually break through the barriers of those habitual patterns. And the Buddha put it, whatever we frequently think about, thus does our mind incline. We're going to incline towards what those habitual patterns are. So we actually have to consciously work with them to be free of them. And you know, you could say in the process of waking up, there's this tension between habit and intentional practice. And you could look at that as in a very judgmental and depressive way. It's like, I have to fight this fight. But you could look on it as a creative tension. Like, where else but in the midst of sleepiness and tiredness am I going to find energy? Where else but in the midst of distraction am I going to find concentration? So you can certainly look at it in that way, that this is an opportunity to actually be creative, which is like looked on as the pinnacle of practice, creativity. So the 7 factors, there are 3 passive factors, 3 energetic factors, and then 1 key factor. So, you know, Buddhists love lists, and they love delving into lists, and honestly, I kind of like them too, so I'm going to go with it. So the 3 passive factors are concentration, which is that single-pointed focus of the mind, which we do in Zazen. Tranquility, which is quietness of mind. And then equanimity, which is balance of mind. Subtle differences there. And then the 3 factors that are energetic, effort, which is actually the choice to be mindful. We actually have to put effort into that. Investigation, which is actually seeing what's happening, observing what is happening. And then joy, which is, in the Buddhist canon, it's kind of defined as intense interest in practice, which is really an interesting definition of joy. But we'll look at it a little bit more. And then the 7th factor, mindfulness, is the key. Mindfulness underlays all of these factors. It will organically develop all of these factors, and it brings all of these factors into proper balance. So let's look at mindfulness, because it's something that, you know, it's like the word Zen. It's out there in pop culture, being used in all kinds of contexts. And to look at the factors, I'm going to draw on the teachings of a Vipassana teacher, Gil Fronsdal. I don't know if any of you know him. He's the founder of Insight Meditation Center, not Society, the one on the West Coast. He's a Vipassana teacher, but he trained at the San Francisco Zen Center. We looked at a lot of his work on reconciliation and ethics when we formed our ethics policy. He's like sharp as a tack, really clear thinker. And in talking about the factors, he uses the analogy of driving, which I think really makes the differences between them really a lot easier to understand. So I'm going to steal that analogy. So mindfulness would be being attentive to the driving conditions. And that's an everyday form of mindfulness we can all relate to. So we maintain mindfulness by not letting ourselves get distracted by the sights, by the passengers, by the radio. And mindfulness always arises in a situation. It always arises in relationship to ourselves, to other people, to things. It's always situational. So out there in the secular world, mindfulness can be really skillful. Jon Kabat-Zinn, who is kind of the guy who created mindfulness-based stress reduction and is a Zen practitioner, gives a definition of mindfulness which is very secular. He says, mindfulness is awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally, which is a really good secular definition, but it's not a Buddhist definition of mindfulness. So let's look at a Buddhist definition. This is Andrew Olandesky, who's a Buddhist scholar and teacher. He says mindfulness is an inherently wholesome or healthy mental factor. So it cannot function in any moment when the mind is under the influence of greed or hatred, even in their mildest versions of favoring or opposing. Anytime you want or don't want things to be a certain way, the mind is not being mindful. So that's real familiar to us in Zen, right? The great way is not difficult. It simply involves not picking and choosing, greed, aversion. Nyoitai Trace, who's one of our teachers, is in our lineage. She says, right mindfulness is based on the intimacy of all things, the non-dual, and thus expresses selflessness. As a practice, right mindfulness means we take up the whole catastrophe, the body, senses, thoughts, and surroundings as ripe practices for realization, leaving nothing out. So you can probably see there that the secular mindfulness movement is the tip of a very deep iceberg. It's an iceberg that goes all the way down. And ideally, secular mindfulness does actually cultivate a more objective, less egocentric, more empathic interaction with the world, frame of reference, and it can do a great deal of good out there in the world. It does. We see it in education, in the caring professions. We probably all know people who've benefited greatly from secular mindfulness. However, it's not inherently wholesome. It can be used, it is used by the US military and the Korean military to train snipers. It is used in the corporate world to increase productivity. So in and of itself, it's not wholesome in the sense that Buddhist mindfulness is. So basically, mindfulness in Buddhism is not a self-help or agenda-driven tool. It's the whole thing. It's the real deal. So that's the first and most important factor of awakening. It's the basis. And then the second factor is investigation. So investigation is careful discernment regarding the current traffic conditions. So we're noticing the red light, the stop sign, the other traffic. And usually we're on autopilot. We don't even know we're doing that. But if you're not doing it, you're going to be in big trouble, and everyone around you is going to be in big trouble. And we're not always careful with our minds, right? It's really easy to be deluded when we're careless in using our minds. You know that story you hear a lot of the guy who's in the dark room and he comes across a rope and he touches it, he can't see it, and he thinks it's a snake. And he reacts as if it's a snake, and disaster ensues. It's really easy to mistake ropes for snakes all the time. I was driving with Kensei. This is a very embarrassing story. We were coming back from Toledo Hospital. We had visited Suck. And we're coming this way on Bancroft. And you know, coming the other way, the lane divides into a turning lane and a lane that comes straight. And there were traffic cones in the middle of the road. And my story is, somehow it looked like that car that was coming straight at us was going to turn. So I just went. I turned right in front of it. It is true. And Kensei has since driven in a car with me, so she's forgiven me. But it's really easy to misinterpret, you know, to be careless. I remember driving with my sister once on a country road in Ireland, and how it was like twilight, you know, the most dangerous time to drive. And however the light hit that road surface, it looked like there was a wall in front of us, and she just slammed on the brakes. But it was really just the road surface. So we do this all the time. We think we know what people's motivations are. We think, you know, they're being mean to me, when perhaps they don't even notice you exist. We do this all the time. Numerous examples. So investigation is the ability to clearly distinguish the details of which we're mindful. And how open are we in that investigation? In Buddhism, we go very deep into investigation. Thich Nhat Hanh talks about how do you encounter the bud on a tree. Do you notice that this bud is telling you it's a leaf? It's going to fall. It's going to be the earth. It is the earth. This bud is as large as the earth. Or do we simply put our fixed view onto that bud? There's a reason why right view is the first step on the Eightfold Path, because view can trap you like nothing else can. So investigation, really important. Then the third factor is energy or effort. Energy is applying ourselves to the task at hand while being attentive to the details we have investigated. This is so Buddhist, isn't it? It's like we're unfolding it all the way. So when driving, we need to apply energy to adjusting the steering wheel, acceleration, brakes, conditions. And energetic effort combined with investigation can be really joyful, like we're going into the realm of joy here. For instance, have you ever gone on a route which you always drive, but you're never the passenger? And suddenly you're the passenger and the whole thing looks different. Daijin and I drove not long ago, and it was somewhere around Secor. He was in the passenger seat, and he just looked over, and there's a little cemetery there. Like, I've driven past that a million times. I've never seen that cemetery there. And it was just so amazing, you know, what we miss. Thich Nhat Hanh says that energy is not the result just of good health or the wish to achieve some goal, that it's a result of feeling some meaning in our life. I think that's really profound. And we also need to be careful with effort. Making effort at the wrong time can actually be harmful. Poor Mark had beginning instruction tonight, and if I had told him, now go and practice for 2 hours every single day, that would not have been very skillful. Yes, effort, but apply it in a skillful way, 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day. So we have to, the middle way in all things, as the Buddha would say. And then joy and tranquility. So joy comes from the application of mindful energy. And it is so vital to our practice, man. If you approach practice as drudgery and not joyful, it's unsustainable. I've seen people burn out and leave and never come back. You really have to have that edge of energetic interest and joy. It's not going to be there every single time you sit, right? but it has to be in the mix there somewhere. And to use the driving analogy, certain kinds of driving can be really relaxing, really joyful. A nice drive in the countryside, like a free and open highway. It really can give us a sense of freedom, uplift us. I should say, too, that effort, diligence, is always accompanied by tranquility, by ease. It's when we're separated from an activity that it's a drudgery. But when we're actually one with that activity, when we're in the flow of that activity, there is joy, there's effort there, but there's none of that tightness around it. We're actually creating space around it. So concentration, which is one we're very familiar with in Zen. So if we're driving and a kid runs out in front of us, suddenly we are laser focused, right? We are really concentrated. But you can't maintain that level of concentration all the time. You can't walk around in zazen all the time and actually function in the world. So concentration is the ability to be intently and fully focused, blocking out distractions and overcoming fatigue, apparently. Interesting. So samadhi, concentration, the sam part of that word means bringing together. The means bringing together to a certain place. And the D means energy of mind. So we collect our energy of mind and direct it towards an object. Very intentional. And to have mindfulness, we need concentration. And once mindfulness is developed, concentration is so much easier. You probably notice this relationship as you practice. And it's important to remember that concentration in itself is not wholesome. You can focus on things that'll take you right out of your life. Any addictions, pornography, whatever it happens to be. It all depends on the object of concentration. So the Buddha focused all his attention on suffering and suffering. And out of that, such great good comes. So we really need to be very intentional on what we concentrate on. And then equanimity. So equanimity is like the pinnacle. Some of you were at the body workshop on Saturday, and Roshi really focused on equanimity, coming down into that still point. It's absolutely vital to our practice. And in driving, it's like we're unperturbed by driving challenges. So equanimity is the pinnacle or the conclusion of the 7 factors. It's not the same as tranquility. Tranquility is stillness of mind. Equanimity is balance of mind. So really, as Roshi referred to it, you're not swayed. You're not pulled around by every little thing. And it's not that you're like an old dead tree and you're rigid and you're sitting there, because the wind will come and blow you right over. You're more like the willow. Those roots are deep. You sway with the wind. You can adapt to circumstance. You can actually work skillfully, which is what Kuan Yin does here. Hears the sounds of the world, hears the suffering, and responds skillfully from that place of total balance, total equanimity. So, the 7 factors, obviously they're progressive, and they're constituting steps on the path of practice, on the path to awakening. The Buddha said that the 4 immeasurables, which we recite every liturgy, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity, we call it, what do we call it? The generating love and compassion. That the 4 immeasurables plus the 7 factors of awakening bring complete enlightenment. So these are not minor And once we identify them, it certainly can encourage us to work with them and really notice them in our lives. And they're also mutually supportive. We don't need to separate them out into this and that. They really work like a spiral. So as mindfulness starts to become established, we can begin to investigate. Investigation evokes effort and interest. Interested effort brings joy. Then the well-being of joy brings us relaxation, freedom from mental agitation, which brings tranquility. Tranquility supports concentration, and all 6 are conditions for having equanimity. Of course, with greater equanimity, we can foster mindfulness, and so back, all the way cycling through. And the beautiful thing about that is these factors are present in your mind simply by virtue of being human. You don't have to do anything to make them happen. They're actually there all the time. So as the teachers are always saying, trust yourselves, trust your own minds. We have everything we need for practice and for enlightenment. A Tibetan master, Shankar Rangdral, who he's like a 19th century teacher, but he was said to be an emanation of Milarepa, who is like one of the big guns in Tibetan Buddhism. And he wrote this verse: "In a single instant, the light of a lamp can illuminate a house that has been dark and uninhabited for 1,000 years. Just so, realizing the luminous nature of your own mind, even for an instant, will purify an eon's worth of negativity and obscurations." I've been looking a lot at this resource. Have you seen it? The Jukai teachings, transcribed by Kensei and Enmei. And in this, Doan says, whenever I see people in the Dokusan room, I always assume they're going to be a full and complete Buddha. And that's how I relate to each one of you. How wonderful if we could relate to ourselves like that. So let's take it up. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow
Thank you for coming, everybody. Come back inside. Are there any announcements? Why, I have two. First is if you enjoy Wednesday nights, you may also enjoy weekday mornings, Tuesday through Friday, and now Saturdays. The Han starts at 6:50, and Zazen begins at 7, and it would be lovely to have you on Saturday. And if you come on Saturday, you could also make pasta this week. So, many opportunities on Saturday. Thank you. Anyone else? Please restore the center.